Good morning, good afternoon, good night, for wherever you're joining us from. Thanks everybody for coming to join us on our session this morning here where we are. We're having a look at international standards in terms of strategies and policies associated with global markets. And we have a stellar lineup of guests who are going to pretty much just bring us through the state of the art in relation to where we are in standardization in relation to the global markets. So some housekeeping rules just before we get things underway. All participants except speakers and the chairs will be muted. When you join us through the Wova platform, please ask your questions in the chat there. If you have any issues associated with the chat, associated rather with the session, you can contact Anna Garcia if there's any technical problems. And the session is being recorded. These, just to give a shout out to our sponsors, because we wouldn't be able to do our European Big Data Value Forum event, which is a massive event, without the support from our industry partners. So just the lineup for today, as I said, that we've got a stellar crew involved. I'm chairing, my name is Ray Walsh. I'm involved in BDVA under their chair of their standards task force. I'm from Dublin City University, and I'm involved in emerging technology standardization on multiple committees. And this morning, we have Sonia, Lindsay, Ashok, Pat, Silvana, and Rob, who are going to join us, and we're going to have a quick chat, as I said, about standardization, emerging technologies, and all things good on the European scene in this multiple ICT ecosystem situation that we have. Okay, so without further ado, I just introduced the task ahead of us. We have a few, I suppose, areas of interest to us in terms of platforms that are coming out, which are data intensive. We have standardization happening in this area with ISO, IEC, SC42. We have World Economic Forum looking at standardization issues. We have the European Commission looking at standardization issues. And luckily enough, we have Silvana here today, who will give us a good overview of some of the good work that's going on at Commission level. We have our standards development organizations, ETSI and Sensenelec, who are working with the European Commission trying to affect change to bring, I suppose, stabilization to the ICT developed environments. And what happens normally is we have this innovation life cycle, and this innovation life cycle has massive disruption where people have invented new technologies and cool things appear, and we get spanking new iPhones and Android phones and new gear, new technologies, new services, new products, and they're based on the emerging technologies, the big data, the IoTs, the cloud, relation to smart cities in blockchain, the digital twin, quantum computing, etc., etc. And we need standards then to consolidate that. So at some stage we need to calm down that chaos, that flux where we have this massive splurge of innovation, and it's survival of the fittest, and the fittest get standardized, and then we have world adoption of that new technology, and then after a period of calm, we have an explosion again and the whole thing starts up again. So it's a really cool environment to be working in. So that's setting the scene. And what I'm going to introduce each of our speakers, and each of our speakers then will have about 10 minutes to give their background and their view in relation to the topic. So the digital single market, standards, and how they can affect the emerging technologies. And I'm going to introduce each speaker by name. And up first will be Sonia Ziller. Sonia is a colleague of mine from Big Data Value Association and comes from Siemens, and I'm ex-Siemens, so I'm just putting that out there myself. And Sonia is the lead on trustworthy AI systems. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sonia, and Sonia can unmute herself. And here are Sonia's opening slides.
Okay. Thank you, Roy, for introducing me, and thank you for giving me the first slot of presentation. I've prepared some short, like 5 minutes presentation in order to setting the scene and give you this perspective from my perspective to the topic of international standards, strategies, and policies, which I think is a very central topic. Maybe Ray, you just move to the first slide. I mean, in terms of, Ray has asked us to provide some information about the background, where we're coming to, and basically I'm wearing two hats in this session. So on the one side, it's in my role of chief editor from the Streeter of the new partnership in AI, and here we are concerned about the question in how to build trust and create a level market in AI data and robotics. And here I can share some of my information or my background and my thoughts on top of this. And secondly, at my normal job at Siemens, I'm leading here the Trustworthy AI core module at Siemens Technologies. And here we are concerned about how to build trustworthy industrial AI applications. So basically, I was thinking to cover here both aspects and to share my perspective on this. However, they are quite aligned content-wise. Maybe Ray, you go to the next slide. So let me reuse a slide which we are currently reusing when we are introducing the new partnership in AI data and robotics. And I'm sharing this because we have putting forward 5 investment areas. So basically areas we want to put activities on. And one of the areas, so this is one of the area 5, which you see on the left side. It's about guiding standards and regulations. So there's a dedicated investment area in the new partnership where we aim to build trust and create a level market. And the promotion of standards is very central. The promotion of drive European thinking towards international standardization bodies, but also to ensure that we are bringing all these different players together to ensure where are needs for standardization, and also like the digital innovation hubs, for example, they might come up with new challenges so that we ensure that all these players come together. This is one of the investment areas I think the new partnership is aiming to work towards. So for that reason, with my hat from the partnership, I can share that there will be a lot of activities, and I'm very happy that we have this discussion in here and the activities of Ray and the BDVA, that there will be a continuation in the new partnership. Maybe Ray, you can move to the next slide. This is now a perspective I would like to give with my head from Siemens side, like how to implement trustworthy industrial AI. So on this slide, you could also find a Siemens logo. I mean, the message here I would like to convey is that we see industrial AI bringing really new opportunities to society, economy, and environment. So there's a lot of stuff, and we need to ensure that standardization regulation will not be in the way when we are putting this forward. As Ray was mentioning before, if you build industrial AI, very often these systems are quite complex. Think about a drone-based system for safety applications in industrial setup. So basically you always have you need to align different technologies. They need to be end-to-end. They need to be safe. They need to be trustworthy and. So basically, and all these technology needs to play together in order to ensure that trustworthiness and standards can be fulfilled. So basically, a lot of work needs to be done to ensure that these interfaces are well aligned. So basically, what we are understanding here, that if we would like to put forward industrial AI, needs to be trustworthy. For industrial setup, it's a little bit different because I think in general, technology needs to be trustworthy, right? It's not, I mean, it needs to be safe. Industrial products needs to be robust, reliable, dependable. So this is not a new topic. I mean, it's more or less like continuing how we did before. We think that the AI brings new challenges, technology-wise, and we think that any regulation or certification schemes cannot be avoided, or put it differently, that they will help to overcome current sociopolitical concern. I mean, there's a lot of discussion about it in the topic of trustworthy AI, and I think they will be very valuable in order to ensure adoption of AI technology. However, we think that a lot of things can be do right or can be do wrong. And I think what is of importance for us, and I think here we are aligning with, which is already common ground. I've seen that a lot of people putting the same recommendation forward, but still I would like to emphasize that whenever we put forward AI regulation, we should not do it generic and mix, for example, consumer and industrial applications. It should be always application area and risk oriented. This is simply due to the fact that only if you look at the concrete application, you see which risks are involved, and then you should take action whenever these risks are there. In general, we observe that between industrial application and consumer application that there are different flavors around. In particular, as industrial applications already rely on a high set of sector-specific standards, and here action needs to be done in order to ensure that new AI-based standards are fit well with ongoing norms and standards which are already in use, right? When we talk about conformity assessment, in general, our recommendation is that self-declaration should be way forward. So you would not like to do it more complicated as needed. However, there will be clear areas where certification should be the preferred approach, because the trust of the people is always central. So basically this is always central, but certification always is like additional efforts which needs to be done. So basically here a clear analysis where certification is needed needs to be reflected. And I mean, this is quite clear that this is very much in alignment with the risk, underlying risk. And then the last point I would like to put forward is that, and this is now the strongest connection to the session here, international standards. We recommend that this is the basis for conformity assessment for AI regulations. And I mean, AI, international standards are in particular of importance when we talk about aligning technology, because the technology is more or less like a, you know, this is like, there's now no national flavors in it, right? So basically we can find common understanding of how these technologies can work together. However, I think, I mean, the ongoing activity, I think Senelec with AI roadmap, which brings some European flavor into it, so addresses European particularities, and which are still mirroring international standards. I think this is a very nice way forward, and I think this should be supported by industry as well as by the new partnership. That's my 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Sonia. Excellent. I'm going to hold off on questions, or we're trying to rapidly get through our speakers. And next up will be Pat McCarthy. Pat is working on international at European level standards-related activities as well, and is based out of Ireland. I'm just going to bring Pat in now. You can unmute his mic, and Pat can do the rest of the introduction.
Thank you, Ray. Hello, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. You know, I'm Pat McCarthy, and I support cloud, AI, and big data strategies based out of our Ireland Research Centre here in Dublin, and a member of the Huawei European Research Institute. For those of you who don't know, our research institute is distributed across 12 countries with about 2,400 experts, with many experts now in our cloud, AI, data, business model, and a trustworthy lab in our centres across Europe. I personally support the academic research with Science Foundation Ireland Insight Centre, and I'll come back to that in the next slide. Okay, next slide. So when I was looking at the standards challenge, and I kind of came across the BSI group's review, which was an interesting review of the standards complexity in this area, but they also highlighted some of the challenges that are in this. And when you look at the challenges, and I won't go through them, you can read them later, but you'll see that they're very much across the pipeline of data AI, and there are many challenges. And it kind of shows that we're at the start of this journey. We have a long way to go. So how do you actually address and simplify this? I'd like to bring forward a slide from Insight on, let's just click forward. And Insight, Ireland Centre for Data Analytics, we're looking at their second round of research framework, and they upgraded their framework. I contributed to part of that. And one of the things I was keen to focus on is bringing the pipeline focus across the whole, from the sensing to decision-making. One of the things in the academic community is that people tend to focus on specialist areas. They need to, because they have to drive breakthrough to get world research. So they tend to focus on their specific domain. or their specific technology or algorithms or whatever. So it's actually a bit of a stretch for the academic community to actually work across domains and look at things end to end, because sometimes that's seen as perceived to being less complex or less deep. But actually, it's even more complex because you've got to work across these and you've got to meet different requirements. So the whole focus of data engineering and governance and trustworthy AI, which is a key element of this conference theme, I think is really the big challenge we face in the industry. Next slide. So what could we do about it? Well, in what way we like to use the terms that's really a shared responsibility. No one company, no one institution, no one standard today is able to really address the whole solution. We believe that governments and industry should drive the rules and standards, that standards and policy need to ensure security and privacy while enabling application innovation. We believe that standards can't just sit on the shelf. They've got to be certified, and certified by trusted third parties who can ensure that the solution ecosystem is operating, and that security and compliance is really important so that we can build trust. Because a trusted ecosystem needs to validate the cloud AI and big data from the R&D right through to service delivery. It's a big challenge, but by taking it on as a shared responsibility, that's the only way the industry can move forward. Next slide. Final slide. So what I was asked for by Ray, what are the key, some of the challenges? And so I summarized it here with some inputs from my colleagues. And we kind of see this one unified standard as being the holy grail. And that is not simple. It's not even easy within a company because it's different domains, it's different language. People who work in wireless, people who work in IP, people who work in edge, people who work in AI and algorithms, people who work in data modeling, data classification, data governance. All these things are specialist areas, and they actually cross all these standards. And as we look at the other slides that we've seen in this conference, where Europe's opportunity is very much at the national and regional and edge data, particularly with the introduction of 5G and how we can do vertical applications for B2B. That's going to mean we need to work across and how we do that. And I think Europe has the culture and has the consensus and has the leadership and standards to have the opportunity to do this, and probably has the motivation to do it, but it's not a simple challenge. So I take my hat off to Ray and his role. The second thing is to be strategic. You know, this initiative that's taking place now with the coming together of the different organizations with BIGDATA and AI, Robotics and Claire and Ellis and Euro AI, we believe is very important because really Europe needs critical mass. And you can't speak one language unless we're all in the same room, unless we're all working on the same strategic agenda. And actually, we're all working together. It comes back to the shared responsibility. So we're a huge supporter of this strategic agenda and this idea of really upping the game in Europe to go after B2B, robotics and industrial services so that Europe can be a leader in this area. You know, we're in Europe, we've been here now for 20 years, and we're keen to see Europe grow in this strategic way. So to help support that, then our European research, in addition to the rest of Huawei supporting partnerships with SMEs and our various business partners in Europe, you know, we can contribute more, and we're contributing today in areas like strategic research in these various areas across our labs. We're working with other companies, working with academics across Europe in all our research. And then we also have an area which you may not have heard about, which is our cybersecurity transparency centers, which is all about enabling third parties to come in and look at solutions, hosting dialogue on how do we enable security and privacy. And we have centers now at the moment in Brussels, UK and Germany. We're building more. And then we think that's going to be important to facilitate the dialogue. And we're open for visits, so feel free to give us a call. And then finally, technology collaboration. You know, we have many hundreds of technology collaboration projects across the Research Institute in academic, in national, and in new. And I just want to highlight one project. We'll click forward. And it's a good example, which is the BIGDATA. And this, I was asked to explain it in the way it's described in the EU project, which is, it's an EU-funded project under HASTE 2020 program, grant agreement 780495, which aims to improve healthcare in Europe for distributed diabetic healthcare, applying big data technologies and supporting the privacy and security requirements for patient data. So we're working with Nissan Tech Innovation Centre in Serbia, at Rotunda Hospital in Dublin, Ireland, and researchers, university researchers in Germany with our Munich lab. So it's a good example of what's needed to bring things together. And I think that's the great opportunity of working in Europe to make it happen. So there's our tree. And if you want to know a little bit more, there's a backup slide with a little bit more of what we're thinking in this area. Ray, you're on mute.
I started talking and I forgot to unmute. But thanks very much, Pat. That was very, very good, concise and within time. Like to see that and give us more time for discussion towards the end. Yeah, it's great to get an insight into the actual the breadth of the why research is going on within Europe. So next up is going to be Lindsay. So Lindsay is a chief standardization engineer from NEC, but I know Lindsay from all over the place when it comes to standardization. We keep popping up on the same committees, but I'm not going to tell you about that. Lindsay's going to tell you about what he's doing. Over to you, Lindsay.
Thank you very much, Ray. Can you flip to the next page, please? Thank you. This gives my two hats. Sonia was also starting off with two hats. On the left side is me at NEC, and basically handling a lot of, let's say, standardization activities and working with Ray, I must say, and others on Stand ICT, which we'll hear about more a little bit later. And on the right side of the page is my commitment to ETSI. I'm since this year chair of the ETSI OCG AI group, board member of ETSI for the last 2 or 3 years, chairman of an information context management group, and involved in cooperation with Sensenlec in several places, including smart manufacturing, which has an overlap with AI, as we all know. And down below that, as Ray mentioned, all over the place, the last 10 or so years. But my initial story started with physics. So I still have an experimental hang to things. Next page, please. So just to explain, one page NEC and then one page ETSI. So NEC is pushing for AI for years. And on the last few years, the research lab I'm working at in Germany has been looking at AI for health. And there's a little news about some recent activities or successes, maybe too soon to say success, but at least activity. And plus, the smart cities aspect is very important. I'm not sure if everyone knows, in Japan, smart cities are a very big emphasis because of, well, most Japanese people live in the big cities, and there's a need for more and more efficiency. So AI is very important there. And even in Heidelberg, where I work in Germany, we have some recent projects on AI and, let's say, communication systems for using information from cities for citizens. So at the same time, we support global standards, and I listed a couple which are relevant. And in particular, the COVID-19 activity, I really want to advertise that, although it's not AI, all the groups around Europe and around the world trying to support efforts against the human and economic costs of COVID-19. It really is a parallel and additional burden we all need to put effort into. But anyway, that's not today. Next topic, please. Next page, please. So this gives a one-pager overview for how ETSI is looking at standards for artificial intelligence in the area of ICT. And the colorful columns are the different working groups, and the hard-to-read rows are looking at, let's say, the very basics of terminology right through to the bottom, or the end of the story, which is testing and KPIs, and as someone mentioned, the necessity of having some kind of compliance and other activities. So basically, everything done in ETSI at the moment is about ICT, using AI for ICT. But of course, there are aspects like, is that done in a way which is ethically responsible? and such things. So the little blobs on the page give an idea of the extent or the development that's going on from small start to bigger advantage and bigger efforts. And most of the work, I must say, has been on the network side. People call autonomous networks nowadays. So if you want to learn more, there's a white paper, and of course, all the ETSI specifications are online, so you can find something. But next page, please. I wanted to address one of the key problems we've got for, let me say, getting global view, and that is, are there too many AI organizations? Well, the answer is no, that not too many, but they're too disconnected. And organizations like BDVA and meetings like this one are bringing together different groups, but we do not have the experience and the, I should say, human resources to cross-connect as much as we should or must. And people think they can develop something on their own and not need to talk to every person who's doing something. But the end result is, as we all know, a lot of diversity and lack of interoperability. So we have to invest more, not just on developing, but on explaining and comparing. That's the end story. It's just not our fault, it's life. So next page, please. So ETSI's in a dialogue with Sen and Senlec on AI, where all of us working from different starting points. But as was mentioned by Sonia earlier, there's a lot of belief in needing to use existing tools or existing, let's say, European mechanisms for creating various certification and testing aspects. So I think there's a bit of a formatting error. I'm sorry about that. But basically, we're trying to work or converge together onto a common conversation. Next page, please. And in the same way, Senlec and ETSI were working, trying to get a common conversation, I think is a good term. It doesn't mean that we are really working on the same things at the same time, but trying to tell each other what's going on is very important. And in this case, there was a recent workshop which was promoted by the European Commission and Sen and Senlec and ETSI people and ISO IEC people were really pushing hard and putting a lot of effort in to just understand what everyone's doing. So group 3 was just one particular topic. We could continue, but next page, please. So to be short, this is the two issues I'd like to conclude on. One is that in Europe, and it's a global issue, but in Europe in particular, we should not limit ourselves or let the projects which are doing a lot of development continue to only focus on one use aspects of AI. It's a good start, but it's not a good end. So we need to have reusable aspects of AI. And of course, standardization helps to make that happen. The other thing is security and privacy. What I think both prior speakers mentioned, we need to have acceptable levels because of acceptance on one side, but also safety and other issues. So it's not perfect maybe in every case, but it's suitable for every case. The other one is interoperability. And as global businesses know, if you try to have unique solutions in every country, then every country is actually worse off. But every country is fighting different sets of bugs, not getting the best of breed, as they used to say. So global interoperability is really essential. And the people who lose out if you don't have it are actually everybody's citizens. So it's effort we need to put in. So the final point on impact and how can European stakeholders benefit? Well, as I emphasize, we need to invest on this dialogue like we are today and like the Commission's been promoting since years and etc. But somehow we have to up our game as far as getting the different groups to collaborate in a technical way as well as a friendly smile and a few key words. And finally, to get a real stakeholder benefit, we need to also push hard on testing and critiquing results from AI, because many companies or many, let's say, standardized solutions may be very good in one place or not so good in another, and it's almost impossible to compare and to pick the best solutions if there's no, let's say, acceptably fair way of comparing. And most of us in Europe have gone through this process once or twice with getting mobile telephone, what do you call it, mobile telephone contracts to be comparable. The Commission had to hit people on the head a few times. The same thing with energy and energy pricing. You really don't know if you've got a good system running unless there's, let's say, transparent testing at the basis and transparent information. So those are what we really need once we've got something running, to be sure that we've got something running well. Okay, that's my 10 cents. And as you can see, my photo is at the top to say that it's not ETSI saying that, it's not NEC saying that. That's my, let's say, hopefully well-informed opinion. Thanks, Ray.
Thanks very much, Lindsay. I really appreciate that. And we're bang on time again. So I really appreciate everybody's efforts to keep within 10 minutes, and so that we'd have time for a Q&A at the end. Next up, actually, without any further ado, is someone who's been at the forefront of standardization for the last 4 or 5 years in relation to European standards. And Silvana, who's CEO of Trust IT, is at the core of a lot of discussions in relation to standards development, support to standards development, and working directly with the European Commission through Horizon 2020 and future Horizon Europe projects. Without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Silvana. She's already unmuted, and here we are with our opening slide.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ray. Thank you also to all the other speakers. They're great discussions. I'm already pulling out some linkages already to this presentation. So thanks for organising this, Ray, as well. This is a very timely part of a particular year, as we know. So I'm the CEO of Trust IT. We can already move to the next slide, Ray. I'm also the Stan ICT coordinator. You've heard maybe Stan ICT in different threads of the conversation. I'll talk about that in a moment. My company is a dynamic SME. We foster innovative ICT solutions across Europe and globally. We also concentrate on digital marketing and communications. I've put a snapshot of some of our research and innovation portfolio projects that we work on. And if you can see at the bottom, there's a dedicated section on ICT standards. But I thought it was interesting to actually also state the other topics that we work on that are horizontal across the digital single market topic specifically, and where standardization is absolutely crucial. We were founded back in 2002. I have nearly 50 people in my team, and we also have an in-house development team that works on web-based solutions and custom software implementations. Next slide, Ray. Thank you very much. So why am I here? And I stated, I'm the Stan ICT coordinator together with a fantastic team. Ray Walsh is the expert advisory group chair and a project partner with DCU in Stan ICT, and Australia, our other third partner, who concentrates on networking and bringing together the associations more as Stan ICT. We were also funded as a pilot project. So the Commission back in 2017 as a coordination and support action in the past, put together a call to try and increment Europeans working more around working groups and technical committee working groups in standards bodies. And this actually happened as a result of Stan ICT, which put out 1.4 million euro to fund ICT European standards experts. This time round, there was another call, and we luckily won this Stan ICT looking to 2023, where the funding increased, and it's now 3 million on the table. And there are 10 open calls. What you see here is the first open call that's already open, that you can link from the website, and there are already a list of topics and priorities that have been indicated there. There are two elements for Stand ICT that are absolutely fundamental. The first is this opportunity to get in standards experts to support the work they're doing. And what's relevant for this community at the EBDVF is that there are an abundance of projects we know that work on standards efforts today, and then the projects finish. So this is a great opportunity to ensure that in the effort that you're doing in your project, in the specific project under Horizon 2020, or a national based one where you're working with other countries on standards work, this could be an opportunity to actually have more effort given funding to support this. The first open call opened 2 days ago. It closes on the 4th of January. We wanted to highlight, due to the specific year, ICT healthcare as one of the top priorities, but it's not clearly just on this. And if we go to the next slide, what we did do is actually go to the expert advisory group that you see here. We're absolutely thrilled to have interfaces that lock into direct commitments on the working groups. You've heard already what Lindsay's doing, Ray, and we have Anna as part of our group too, where we go out to them and we don't just link whatever's prioritized in the rolling plan of ICT standardization, which is crucial, obviously, but we want to ask you, the community, what is actually needed today. So we make sure that our core topics are always the top priorities and that they can be tailored. We have 10 of them over the next 36 months. So we can ensure that we can get applications in that are timely for the current state of the year. Moving on. Thank you, Ray. So I don't have many slides at all. This is my final slide. And what you can see in the top right is the YOS. This is the EU Observatory for ICT Standardization. And this is where I don't have other slides, but what's coming out at the end of November is the YOS for the ICT standards community. For Stand ICT Phase 1, what we developed was a repository of a number of standards. You might be familiar with this on the Stand ICT website. But what we wanted to do this time round is to actually introduce an area where a community can come together to discuss, to indicate what's new, put in any gaps or priorities or standardization efforts that we are working on now, and it's completely updated. And we're thrilled to be working on this, and we want to be able to provide this as part of the Stand ICT 2023 project, and already with comments that have come in from the previous speakers on having a shared responsibility or having somewhere to explain and compare, introducing a common conversation. I mean, just your slide before, Lindsay, on all the different groups, what came to mind immediately was, wow, could we have a discussion as part of the YOS for Stand ICT as soon as it comes out, that you can all discuss this together there. So I think this is something that I want to bring into the conversation as part of this panel discussion now, and see how we can do that. And what we want to see is lots and lots of applications coming. We're seeing that we're looking to fund around 400 ICT standard experts over the following months, timely, relevant, and help supporting EU digital sovereignty moving forward and making a difference. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Silvana. Very, very, very timely, as I said, and Stand ICT is getting a lot of traction at the moment. The European Commission is raving about the project, and there's lots done, but lots more to do in the next 3 years. And next up, I'd like to introduce another colleague of mine who's we keep bumping into all over the place. Hi, Ashok. He's the Director of Market Perspectives and Innovation at Sensenelec, and Ashok is going to give us an introduction to what's happening in relation to standard strategies and policies from the Sensenelec point of view. Over to you, Ash.
Thanks very much, Ray. And thank you, and thanks to all my fellow speakers as well, and the audience for staying with us. And there's some really interesting points that I try and add to, very much from the perspective of somebody who supports the workings of the standardization system, so that stakeholders can develop the standards that they need. Perhaps, Ray, if you could go on to the next slide, please. So that's me with my haircut, not in my pandemic mode at the moment with my haircut, but we'll swiftly move on. The most, sorry, Ray, if we can go back to the important part of the slide is on the top right, and Sensenelec. And I really wanted to just spend a minute just explaining. I'm sure many people know, but just in case, so Sensenelec are two of the three European standards organisations recognised by the European institutions, alongside our sister standards body at European level, ETSI. And I wanted to start off that everything that Lindsay said in terms of the way that we need to operate, it isn't about doing everything the same way, but it's about being joined up and bringing people together and allowing that flow of information and knowledge, so that standards can be developed in a coherent and transparent way. So I really wanted to pick out the points that Lindsay made. So Sensenelec, ETSI deals with European telecommunication standards. Senelec develops standards for electrotechnical, and Sen is more multi-sectoral, and things from transport to materials to construction, civil engineering, mechanical engineering. And the key point about Sensenelec system in Europe is that we are anchored in the national at the national level through our national members. We're associations of national members, national standards bodies in Europe, 34 countries. We are ourselves Sensenelec, European regional standards bodies, and through our members and through Sensenelec, we link to the international level. And that's key for this session today, because that's an important functionality, an important benefit that we have. And at the end of the day, why are we operating standard systems? Is to provide a means for those people, those organizations, those stakeholders who have a need to develop a standard. They can actually produce it where they want it, in the time they want, and with the scope that they want, and with the outreach that they want. So if they want a global standard, they can come to our system, and we can facilitate that they have a global standard through ISO and IEC. If a regional standard is what's needed for them, because of the state of play, or because of the legislative structures in Europe, then we have the provisions to do that. And of course, if a national standardization solution is what's needed, then through our members, we can facilitate that. So we provide this continuum from national through regional European to the international level. And the levels work coherently. We're not looking to promote our standards as from Europe to global, as a default, unless that's what our stakeholders see as the best solution for them. More often, it's about taking global standards or developing global standards as a first step. With that backdrop of what the standardization system that Sensenelec strives to be an integral part of, what that means is we can look at a little bit further about where we are today. And I think it's probably worth, as in many cases, looking at today in the context of yesterday and where we've come from and the story. And if you could move on to the next slide, please. Yeah, this is really the slide that's trying to tell a bit of a story, and it's not for the story itself, but because it's the conclusions it comes to. I've been around in the standardization system for around 25 years, and I can remember times when I was dealing with very well known technologies in materials, and really the standards then in the mid-90s, they were standards for those who knew. Everybody knew each other. They knew the applications they needed. They knew what was what and who to speak to, and so it was rather closed, rather inward looking, and that was fine because that met the needs. And we see that Sensenelec grew up in the 60s, and that's we saw standards were very much about industrialization, supporting manufacturing, supporting the creation of structures, built structures. Then we moved through to in Europe in the 1980s, roughly to about 2000, and the focus was on standards to develop the single market, standards supporting specific pieces of legislation in a very coherent and joined up way. And we have a period which I've chosen to denote as 2000 to 2010, where standards moved beyond arguably the known and started to embrace wider issues as the world was evolving and how technologies were evolving and how business and industry was evolving. And then we're still at the end of this period in where I call it the new technologies, where we have a range of new technologies. Arguably, standardization is more driven by new technologies coming on stream and what the stakeholders need to deploy those technologies to make sure that they integrate with existing technologies, integrate with existing systems, that they can be trusted. Everybody can talk the same language, everybody knows the performance measures, everybody knows the testing and the reporting solutions which are standardized and awareness. And then we come through to, we're on the edge of, well, we're well into this new area of what I've called technological disruption era, and you'll see the technologies relevant there listed: AI, open source data, management of data, exploitation of data, quantum, cyber, hyperloop, blockchain. Of course, we can go on, and some of my colleagues have mentioned that. And so standardization has evolved, and it's grown from a rather niche and rather even hidden activity to a much more aware and involved, certainly, activity. And it's looking beyond simple vertical technologies and vertical business or industrial sectors. And there are many, many more issues now which are cross-cutting. And that includes the new technologies, which are then applicable from basically all business and all industry sectors. And how do those sectors benefit from those technologies? How do we keep our systems operating as they should? How do we keep our citizens safe? How do we meet the needs of the economies at the macro level, which are trying to grow and trying to make sense of all these? And the answer is, one part of the answer is standards, but standards now today need to be made in a joined up, connected and transparent and coherent way. If we can go on to the next slide, please. Here on this slide, I've, excuse me a second, something popping up on my screen. I've tried to look at it's not, standards are only a means to an end. And in Sensenelec, we started to talk about standards building trust and trying to look at that in terms of what are the aspects or how do we break that down? So certainly in Europe, this so-called harmonized single market, and I've mentioned the role of some standards supporting directly the application of the law at European level. Of course, the backbone of the economy is a competitive industry, and again, the wealth of opportunities that industries have in terms of coming from research innovation, new technologies, I mentioned disruptive technologies, but standards are a building block to help deployment of those new knowledge, those new technologies. That links to the third block there, which is actually that trust. And it goes beyond the use of the technology, but the implications and the impact of the technologies to the wider societal parties, societal interests. Of course, Europe invests a lot in innovation and research. The framework programs, but industry in Europe invests a lot on innovation as well. And how, if we don't integrate standards with those activities, if we don't let those scientists and researchers and innovators know what standards are and how they can help them to build their businesses, to deploy their new products and systems and services and new technologies through standards, then we're missing a trick. And of course, linking to the international level on the right-hand side, the Sustainable Development Goals drives arguably everything beneath that in terms of making sure that we are sustainable, that we have resilient societies, that we have competitive industries and business sectors. So standards, at the end of the day, we need to find a way through. We need to, of course, we need people who are experts in the technologies and know the nuts and bolts of those. We need to know how the standardization systems can be brought into play to help those who need standards to develop them. It's not people like me who decide which standards should be developed. I'm the last person to ask, but I'm hopefully helping to operate a system which is open and is agile to meet the needs of, and willing and ready to meet the needs of those who have a need for a standard or will be impacted by a standard. And these types of events where we can come together and share that type of information about who we are, what we are, doesn't mean to say we have to converge on everything, converge on one standard even, but I think it's about having a joined up choice. Thank you. Sorry, I maybe overrun. Sorry, Ray, you're muted.
Unmute my audio. When I move around the controls, everything gets messed up. So yes, thanks, Ash. It's brilliant, and I like the way that you just introduced at the end the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which are becoming more and more strategically important. And I also cite the work that St. Senelec have been doing and focus on AI and the work that was going on during the year as well, and the SC42 work as well. Next up, last but not least by any means, is Rob Brennan, and Rob is a giant of a man who is running an extremely large project in Horizon 2020 at the moment, and normally he's just a couple of doors down from me, but because COVID is off campus at the moment, and we're all sort of kicked out of our offices. But Rob is going to bring us through, and I'll hand over to him and let him talk about his areas on the standards and the digital single market. Over to you, Rob.
Hi everyone. So thanks again for the invite, Ray, and it's good to get a chance to talk to the BDVA group. I've quoted so many of your reports and project applications in the past. It's good to meet you. So my background is in data governance and of course AI governance now, with an emphasis on data quality and privacy. But I started actually in telecoms, and as my career, I've transitioned into sort of knowledge engineering and semantics in order to support these new technologies. But that means that my first job was implementing ITU Blue Book standards. So standards that have entwined a lot of the industrial and academic work that I've done throughout my career. And I've been an active contributor to the IETF, OMG, W3C, and 3GPP standardization processes. So I've gone the cycle from implementer to contributor to academic, I suppose. At the moment now, I'm working within the Science Foundation Ireland DAP Centre and its new focus on transparent digital governance. And what this highlights is something that's relevant for the standardization community. Very right. And that's the idea of interdisciplinarity. We need to have, and several of the speakers have talked about this already, we need to have a broader base in order to embrace the new socio-technological world that we're living in. And so this is evidenced in things like, for example, DCU's new Masters in Data Protection and Privacy Law, which has joint streams of computing and law students mixed together in order to train them in these new areas. Okay, right. So, as Ray said, I'm here on behalf of the Elite Standards Project. Elite Standards is a Horizon 2020 Marie Curie Sklodowska-Curie co-fund action. And the idea is that it's going to fund 16 fellowships, both in advanced technology in these different areas that span most of the sort of EU priority areas, but also those AI technology areas that we're all interested in, with combining that with standards research and practice So the idea is training this new generation of standards practitioners that are not only technical experts in their area, but also have knowledge of the standardization system, how to get their ideas into the standardization process, training people on how to engage with that. And so we're able to lead with a wide range of different technology areas. Of course, the individual fellows propose their own projects. But then we couple that with a training program and partnership programs that introduce them into the standardization ecosystem. Okay, great, next slide. So in terms of our program, things that make it interesting and unique, and I think are relevant for the ongoing debate on standardization and how it needs to work. At the center of our process is an industrial engagement for the fellows themselves. So not only do they work in an academic situation, but they also do a 6-month placement with an industry partner who's assigned as part of the process, either in collaboration with the ADAPT Center or through their own prior contacts. And so they get to do the academic bit, but also to make the research relevant for industry before engaging with standardization. We also have a very strong partnership with our National Standards Authority in Ireland, the NSAI. This means that we're automatically connected into the world of ISO committees and mirror groups and all that sort of stuff. So, and that also allows us to sort of highlight opportunities for our fellows in terms of emerging areas, allows us to engage with the standardization process so that they can answer questions on particular topics that come up from the committees that filter down to the national groups. So then another thing is that this diversity of experts that are networked together, as I say, this plays to this multidisciplinary aspect. It also means that even though we are connected to the big standardization processes, we're not afraid to engage with smaller, more agile, de facto or industry standards groups like the W3C, or even working groups like GoFair that are looking at how do we standardize fair metadata for governance of data across Europe and the world. And we believe that by connecting with these smaller groups, we're able to enable a more rapid rollout of de facto standards, or at least start the conversations that will maybe eventually end up in the mainstream standardization committees. And finally, the structured career development plans for our fellows. Obviously, everyone needs that in order to make the most of their career, but it's the idea that we have built in a specific standards training component and standards engagement component to the career plan means that not only are they getting this advanced academic expertise in their chosen topic, but they also have a push and that knowledge, we're breaking down the barriers for these experts in their field to engage with the standardization process. So I suppose one question that I'd throw to the other panel members is, in this new era where we have all these changing societal aspects and new demands on standardization, do we really need more standards, or do we need a more agile process? How are we going to achieve that? Okay, and there's some contact details. So that's me done, right?
Okay, thanks very much, Rob. Sorry, but there's some flicking back and forth there on the slides. Multiple screens going. So look, that gives us a chance now. And listen, I would have to say, I'm looking at the clock. We have 1 minute. 1 minute. You guys are so professional. I said we had an hour to do this, and Rob brings it in 1 minute under the hour. So brilliant. So we've got a half an hour for a Q&A now. So I'm going to ask everybody just to be back on video, so we can switch between the various speakers. So Sonia, Silvana, Rob, Ashok, and Pat and Lindsay. So to get the ball rolling, so Sonia, you've been off. You did the first talk. So I think maybe we'll start with you. Okay, so put the spotlight back on you. In relation to European public-private partnerships, okay, and their projects, you know, how can they help to progress technology and standardization, Sonia?
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Ray, for the question. I think it's very central one that the partnership and the project itself get active in this area. We have in the Streeter document, in the current published, like we published like this 1 month ago, we have a dedicated section about the topic of policy, regulation, certification, and standards. So basically, it's one of the central topics we are addressing in order to ensure the adoption of AI, data, and robotics. And we have also each of the groups putting up recommendations forward what you think is of needed. And I mean, one of the core things is that, and I think it's very much mirroring what I heard in the discussion. It's more like we could just have summarized the discussion. These are the topics we are also putting forward. So on the one side, we need to identify key stakeholders in each of the areas, right? We need to bring them together, ensure that there's good connectivities between them and the AI ecosystem. We need to work with stakeholders and emerging AI ecosystem. We are looking here at digital innovation hubs, the expert there, in order to identify key issues that will impact the adoption and deployment of major sectors. So basically here, I mean, where are the areas where we need to work on, right? And if we go back to the concrete projects, identify the people who could help us. And then I'm thinking, looking at what Silvana was saying, just giving them money they can apply for, and then they get funding in order to put forward these projects. I think it's a good manner. The experience is that mostly the people who are working, who are the experts, right, who could tell you what needs to be done. So the real techies, they might not have an awareness of standards, right? So how would a person being technically deep into it know that he or she would be the ones who could bring forward this? So basically, this is, I think, an activity we really need to enhance. The other activities we highlighted is that we need to support and collaborate in standardization initiatives, harmonization across regulation and standards, and also in terms of aligning with international standardization bodies. But you think the core part is really like engaging, bringing the people together with these different expertise. I think Rob was mentioning the interdisciplinary aspect, right? It's like the different aspects. And then just to say, now I'm answering from a perspective of a PPP project, yeah? And really just think about it. I'm very much interested in putting forward my research agenda, and I'm very much, let it be edge AI or machine learning, whatsoever. I'm this technology-driven person. And then I'm looking at the landscape which you just presented. Like I'm looking at it, and then I think, can I do a machine learning algorithm to improve my way through the algorithm that I'm gonna find a standardization activity I need to work with, right? Because it's very, very confusing. It's very confusing. I mean, you have them on national level, on regional level, on international level, and then they say they do the same but different, and then they say they need to talk to each other. And then it's like different topics. It comes from the sector requirements, but then on the generic requirements. So how do I know how to, whom to, you know, with whom to get in contact and how? So basically, I think this is something we need to address, and it's about bringing the people together, and the matchmaking, I think, will be a central one. I do not have an answer, but I think it would be great if we have working groups and meet as we are doing here right now.
Yeah, thanks, Sonia. Actually, that sort of it links back into like some of the stuff that Pat was talking about earlier. And maybe Pat, we could continue on that theme, like in terms of standards development, standards engagement, and like so. And it's a challenge, obviously. Like, but how can we accelerate sort of the digital Europe agenda, the data and AI ecosystem adoption? From your Huawei perspective, like, and I see some Huawei colleagues in participating as well.
Yeah, so I think the unified standard and how to achieve that has been discussed a lot across the different speakers, and that's been very interesting. You know, we were brainstorming this little session with a few of my colleagues in the labs, and one of my colleagues threw out an analogy which I thought was interesting, which he said, you know, in the old days, Pat, big data was like the new oil. But in many ways, that's a bad analogy, because oil is something that tends, while it's valuable, got exploited. And doesn't really have a great image in the industry anymore. You know, maybe something to think about is really data as the new currency for the digital economy, and that's something that needs to be protected, needs to be trusted, needs to be validated. You know, needs to be able to enable this digital economy in a way that people can be happy for to do it, and that social acceptance is really important. Like, for example, you know, multiple companies, including Huawei, were involved in looking at analyzing COVID X-rays using AI, supporting the medical industry in China. And obviously, in that case, if you anonymize an X-ray, you know, patients will be happy for that to be reused if it can be used to say this is a good X-ray or this is a one with COVID, and it doesn't have their name or anything to do with them. I don't believe people have a problem sharing that data into a data hub, as long as they trust the people who are doing it, that they know that that is the case. So I think this concept of the digital currency, Europe has created the euro. In the old days, we had to change our pounds and punts and francs to go around Europe, but that slowed down the European economy. But now with the euro, if we could do the same for data and do it within Europe, in Europe, for Europe, then I think the world will get behind that, and we'll be able to help accelerate the global digital economy.
Thanks very much, Pat. And maybe pick up that point, Lindsay. Like, you're working actually at international level all the time. So what do you see is of the challenges, like, you know, in relation to, you know, trying to get this engagement, you know, at a higher level, like, and not having, you know, solo runs by national member states trying to do it, because it's a collaboration problem, really, and you've been working on some very large collaboration projects.
I think the key word's collaboration, and the trouble is the resource and the, let's say, past history of how different organizations were set up. So it's very interesting. Around this panel, we have people who've put across some industry views, and also from Sensenelec with, let's say, national partners. And in ETSI, its membership is mainly companies and also SMEs. So each of us have got a, let me say, a certain viewpoint and also certain resources which are all different. And it's hard to actually meet up in one mental space, let alone physical space today. And we're not used to this level of necessary communication, because until now we could bundle things in modules and do our own thing for one use case or one industry segment, and it might have been complicated, but it wasn't impossible. But now we've got, as we've heard and we know, we've got the global view, we've got so many industries impacted by AI, so many citizens worried about AI, so many politicians who know they're going to get blamed whatever goes wrong. It's become hugely complex without an associated, let me say, resource commitment. Of course, the Commission's pushing and promoting, and their work in the last 10 years for even the scholarships which were just mentioned and the many research projects. This is, let's say, mixing the pot or bringing the ingredients together. But our societies are not used to working so hard on such cross-domain issues. Certainly, small companies can't manage it. No way. Medium-sized companies manage it in one area, like if we take our manufacturing industry, they manage to get, let's say, small equipment for manufacturing plants and computer control and maybe analytics of the end product. But it's very hard for them to expand that to, let's say, circular economy and optimizing the total manufacturing and cost of also to the climate and energy and so on. It's just too big. And even very big companies have got a trouble to take something which they may develop in-house and see how it can fit into different countries just around Europe or then globally. We just don't invest enough in this yet. And it's sad but true. And we've been through this game at least 2 or 3 times. If you go backwards in time, the Internet of Things had exactly this trouble. Hundreds of different approaches, gradually rolling them together into common interest groups and common approaches, gradually getting better. If you go back a bit further, you'll find the network, the mobile networks. If you're old enough, you realize before GSM, there were about 6 different approaches to having cellular networks. And it really took not just collaboration, but also proof in the work in the market that some ways are actually cheaper, better, more efficient, more flexible. And these experiences, you just can't get around them. And we just have in Europe and in other countries, we have to just find a way to invest our time and personal resources to make it happen. So unfortunately, these places, these seminars, we're talking now to, I think, 50, 70 people. It's good and it's a start, but the educational aspect and the integrated collaboration between groups is what's needed. And our processes are not really up to it. And Sensenlec have got their history of how they, let's say, bring people together, distribute information, make sure it's not rubbish which goes out on the internet, but it's got a consensus behind it. ETSI's got our own views and ways of doing it, and the open source project's another one, and the Stand ICT. Final point, I think we could take a page from Wikipedia and the Stand ICT project and start having, let me call it managed overviews of AI systems, AI standards, and so on. Not just anybody is allowed to comment like Facebook, and you think any opinion is equal to every opinion, but there should be some validation and some
moderated.
Some understanding moderated, exactly.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
See, the way I interjected there with moderator because I wanted to link in where Silvana and she's obviously with her standards for the expertise, but also just to pick up on that point, but also to look at the Horizon 2020 projects. Like they have these big projects, and Silvana has huge expertise in this area, and they're generating results all the time. But how can we link those results that have been generated by the technology developing partners under Horizon 2020 and feed that into the standards ecosystem? Silvana.
Thanks, Ray. Yeah, extremely important what you're just saying here, and backing up also what you've just said before, Lindsay. Clearly, you know, when a project finishes, they have their task. People are then on to the next thing, aren't they? And what we've been saying for the past 3 years, together with European Commission officials who do also agree with this, I hope I'm not saying anything out of turn now, that if we do manage to have better access to the projects that also end, that their results are then fed into existing working groups, or that even the standards bodies could then even, if we have access to what's out there in terms of the standards efforts in the projects, then the SDO, we can inform and be the facilitator to the SDOs who are working on the efforts. And we can say, hey, this is happening already. So we need to remove the siloed effect of the different projects working on efforts and have it all pulled together, because there's so much going on, and just make sure that it's streamlined and that it can potentially, hopefully, work into the YOS that we're kicking out in these coming months, and that we know that the investment that's been done has been a good one, and it's being taken forward in an area, in an existing area or working group or technical committee. And that's where we go back to the discussion fora. And if I take up Sonia's point at the beginning, she said, I'm working on a PPP project. You have your own agenda and research activities you're working on, you want to make sure that's carried forward and it doesn't just end. How can you also maximize maybe what you're doing and engage with the right people through one dedicated resource, and that could be the YOS that we're just discussing, that I discussed earlier on.
Yes, and it's the issue of impact. And I know Ash wants to get in on this. Like Ash, the impact, standardization can create impact. So how can we sort of help that to happen? Like how can we sort of facilitate the Horizon 2020 initiatives and projects, like to get engaged and raise the impact of standardization? Ash.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I think it's something that's very close to my heart, and it's part of my daily job. Is about looking at how we can, what we call in sense and like integrating standards with research and innovation activities for all types of topics, for all areas of research and innovation. And I think, I think for a while maybe we sat back and we said, oh, if we make ourselves look attractive enough, then researchers and innovators will come to us. And I think that's clearly silly. That's not going to work. And we need to go out and actually explain what is standard. How do we integrate? We have a great target in Europe with the framework programs for innovation and research. And how can we get standardization as a factor recognized in the work programs? How can we get them standardization recognized in the calls? Standardization won't be a solution for every single research project, but for many of them, it can be a viable aspect or even part of a solution for exploiting the value of the findings of the research project later. But that won't be seamless and it won't be effective unless it's factored in right at the beginning. So speaking to the policymakers who are defining the framework programs, along with the scientists who are giving the practical needs, talking to researchers, showing how standardization can fit into a single research project. Is it about having one of our national members as a partner in the project? That we know that works. Linking the project with an existing technical committee so that during the life of the project, that dialogue can work, and that the understanding of when standardization can kick in, how it can kick in, what it needs, what are the ingredients that need to be in place to make that happen. And even picking up standards afterwards, picking up the results of research projects afterwards and having quick and agile solutions to valorize the findings, but to do it in a joined up way. I think we're at the beginning of that discussion and that activity. I did want to, some great discussion there. I did want to jump in on another aspect very quickly. I was involved in a piece of work in Sensenelec some years ago where we were looking at SMEs and how can we show what standardization is for SMEs? And some of it is about showing what standardization isn't. And so we started off by, number one, I think it was a stepwise process. What are standards? How do you use standards? What does it mean for you and your business? How do you find out what is happening in standards? When's the next version of your favorite standard coming out? What are the new standards being developed? How are you plugged in? How are you actually aware of who's doing what in the system is the third level. Fourth level, how do you contribute to, how do you influence the content of a standard? And finally, how do you get involved to propose the development of a standard? For many stakeholders, that fifth level is probably always going to be out of reach, but we can turn that into many, many different areas and break it down, keep it simple. What are the standardization needs? Don't reinvent the wheel.
Yeah. I should ask Rob to pick up on that, because I mean, he's a man who's working in and sees both sides of the fence, and also maybe to pick up because one of the current trends is in relation to the fact that there's this explosion of data out there, and data is everywhere. And what's becoming more and more important now is data governance. So Rob, maybe you could just continue on Ashok's point there, but also to bring in the issue of data governance.
Yeah, well, having worked in a couple of SMEs myself, I think this issue of how to get them to engage with any long-term process like standardization is really, really tough. So I agree with any initiative that you have in order to open up the world to them in that way. For data governance, I think we're at a very interesting point, because the European Commission High-Level Expert Group has identified data governance as a key pillar on which AI, trustworthy AI is going to be built. And this is going to encourage, I hope, much more work in the computer science technological area of data governance, which tends in the past to have been dominated, I think, by the sort of information systems and business areas. And so I think we need a lot more work on metadata standards. A lot of people here will remember all the work within ISO and other places on network management standards and standardizing models so that we could manage the network. Because we needed these digital twins, to use today's terminology, of the network in order to be able to manage it. In order to be able to manage or govern data, we need digital twins of this digital entity. We need a management view of the data. And in terms of standardization, there's been a lot of very disparate initiatives on individual bits of metadata that have been useful for particular domains. But there has been very little linked up thinking on, oh my God, we actually need models of the entire data system in order to be able to effectively manage that. So I think that's a huge opportunity. And I'd like to go back though as well, make one point with Pat, where he's talking about the ability to share data in Europe being critical in order to enable the digital economy and the idea of trust. But of course, this is, a huge idea behind GDPR. GDPR is, yes, it's about protecting citizens' fundamental rights, but it's also enabling the digital single market by enabling transfer of data. So I'd like to know maybe if Pat sees something beyond GDPR that we need to engender this trust.
But actually, that's a question that I think everybody's going to get involved in, because at the center of everything in relation to data is ethics, trust, security. And I know Sonia, Pat, and yourself have big views on this anyway. So I'm going to add Sonia first and then Pat into the mix there on ethics, trust, and security, and the aspect of whether GDPR is enough or whether you need to go from here. So I'll add Sonia first, and Sonia, if you want to just pick up on that.
So I need to unmute. Thank you, Ray. Yeah, I think, in terms of, as Rob was just mentioning, we have the high-level expert group, and a lot of requirements related to the ethical, trustworthy use of AI have been defined, like data privacy, data governance is one of them, but we have several of them. So now the question is how we are addressing them. And I'm just thinking about AI safety, right? Because there's a lot of standards already around who are addressing these issues. And now we are coming with the AI aspect on top of this. So basically, I think it's very central that we, I'm just thinking about, for example, can take an example, you're talking about trains or like autonomous trains, and they have to be safe, right? They have to be safe since many years. And now they might have some AI components because you want to make them autonomous. And now we need to ensure that the AI components, which are on top of this, are complementary to the already existing AI safety standards, right? And this is now something, and then you have to think about, okay, how are they handling today the AI safety? And they are more or less like, then you need to understand the interface to the safety regulation. It's like that they are only talking about the systematic mistakes and then the mistakes which come by accident, which are not foreseen. So now we need to look at AI standards and technology, how to develop KPIs which are matching to the way how the safety people are addressing the standards. So basically, we need to match two different ways how the people are thinking about the point. And this, again, implies a lot of AI research questions, yeah? So basically, I think actually I have a technical background, like I'm a mathematician and then later switched to computer science. But when I look at how these worlds come together, I'm getting really excited because a lot of research questions coming up, yeah? How can you tweak AI algorithm in a way that they can verify it in a manner that the AI safety people are happy, yeah? And if you would develop and bring the people together like this, that they identify new research questions, but they need to be aligned in the existing regulations, because the safety people are not happy if we now come with an whatsoever international AI standards, and this is not complemented to the topic they have been worked on for years. And you know, all this stuff is in the products already, so that you make them very unhappy and that they will not collaborate with them. But I think in general, I think that trustworthiness, ethical AI, I think we are closer to complex industrial products, right? And there are a lot of very challenging research questions we need to address, but we need to engage in this process of communication.
And we actually need to do it in a holistic manner. Like, we can't just treat data on its own. We need to do AI, we need to do cloud. We look at an ecosystem of ecosystems when it comes to standards. But to pick up on the GDPR and the data question, Pat, would you just jump in there?
Well, I think privacy is like the first step, and then you kind of talk about security and ethics, and ultimately it's about enabling trust. But I think sometimes we can lose sight of the challenges of the SME industry and the startups, which ultimately is seen as a kind of a test of the where the economy is at. You know, they compare, you know, Europe and America and how many startups we have in Europe. So, like, you know, an example of that challenge in GDPR, for example, there are a lot of coffee shops in Europe that are afraid to offer free Wi-Fi because of GDPR, because the regulatory requirement would mean they have to do a whole bunch of rules, which if they're offering free Wi-Fi with coffee, there's no economic incentive. So, you know, GDPR is a good thing, but it is a challenge for a lot of SMEs to and in some cases they'll say, I'm out of here, I'm not going to do that. Now, the point is, we need to think in terms of how do we develop this healthy SME ecosystem with the incubators at the center. And, you know, it can't just be about lawyers and paperwork and we'll sue you if you break the rules. You kind of need a systems and a platform model that is certified and compliant that can implement these. And if that's done, then people should feel safe that they can do it and they're not going to be sued. Because I think SMEs are going to be slow to adopt AI outside of the people who are actually building this stuff. The people we're talking to, the people who are converted, but the average SME that's out there that could benefit from using these technologies, when they start seeing some of the regulatory requirements we're going to start putting on them for security and privacy and ethics and everything else, they're going to think twice unless there's a real good B2B benefit for them. And I think AI, robotics, and industrial solutions needs to look at this from the start. The platforms and systems and standards, I think, are going to be important.
Absolutely. I think that's, you're hitting the nail on the head there. And look, we're running out of time, we're about 4 minutes left, and we could talk for hours on this. But I'm going to ask each one in turn, starting with Lindsay and to rotate around and everybody else, for a takeaway message associated with it, because, and I just throw one thing in myself because I won't get an opportunity to do much more in terms of the wrap up, is that GDPR is a regulation, it's not a standard. And we need to start getting the message out there, the difference between standardization, regulation, certification, and legislation. They're all different things, but we need to do our job first, and we need to create standards so we can build regulations that are based on standards. We can build legislation that's based on standards, and we can certify to standards as well. But Lindsay, starting with you, takeaway for the audience. We're down as far as 53 participants now from a high of 72. So I think we're getting to the end of the session, people are getting tired. But, so very quickly, in 3 minutes, so about 30 seconds each to wrap up.
Okay, 30 seconds. The political system helps set the requirements. The standards people help to create means to implement such requirements. The research people give you the, let's say, the physical tools to make it happen. And the end of the story is we need the testing to make sure the whole circle works, and that the political regulations are actually being, working in the usage for the citizens. So we're part of a big circle.
Okay, excellent. Silvana, takeaway message from Standard City and Trust IT.
Yeah, well, I'm going to exploit the participant list because I can see at least 4 or 5 on here who are going to actually apply for funding in the open calls. And I'm going to pick up the phrase of the discussion, which I liked a lot, in adopting this common conversation. And I think the takeaway message should be, if these applications that are coming in that are from individual experts manage to intertwine all of the elements we can encompass from policy, research, industry, and then adding what Lindsay said at the end with the testing phase, okay, these are impactful applications that will certainly be given a priority focus from the expert evaluators, I'm sure. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Savannah. And moving on to Ashok, takeaway message.
I think I want to follow on again very much from what Lindsay said. I think organisations like Sense, Senelec and ETSI, we are there to support. And I think my plea would be to those who think they are interested in standards, they need standards, they want new standards, they want to know more about standards, to be closer to organisations like Sense, Senelec and ETSI, because we can help.
Thank you, Ashok. Rob, your takeaway message?
Well, I actually agree with the summary there of the conversation we had, that a move towards platforms and standards could enable us to move away from a lawyer-driven approach to GDPR, and therefore free up the digital ecosystem.
Thank you very much. And Sonia, your takeaway message?
A takeaway message. So basically, I'm whenever I looked at standards, I was quite impressed, because it's really like interesting to see how people conceptualize the word, and I very much like reading them because I'm always learning a lot, right? And I think actually we need to continue to engage more people, because what I'm seeing here, it's like learning like that there are a lot of activities, we need to bring them together, and we really need to engage the research people, because I think they can, if they know more about it, they can really benefit and they will like it. So I think we need to continue in terms of connecting people, engaging people, and letting them know how much they can benefit and where they can get funding.
Last word to Pat. Takeaway message, Pat.
I think, as I said, it's a shared responsibility, and I look at you guys, you know, you, Ray, working with ITU and OECD and ISO, and Leslie with ETSI, and Ashok with Senelec. You're already engaging in some of the biggest relevant organizations, but we can do more, and we should get out and be involved with the GSMA and other vertical industries, because data can be and needs to be at the heart of all of these organizational strategies, and I think there'll be an open ear for what we have to say.
Yeah, finally, just to thank all our panelists. Thanks to Sonia, thanks to Lindsay, Ashok, Pat, Savannah, and Rob. I've been Ray Walsh, and we've been the family of standardization that have been able to present this particular session to you. Thanks, everybody. Take care and goodbye.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Thank you.